Namaste, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. It is my great honor to be part of this important set of talks from the India Inspires. I am very happy to be in Indore with this group, and I hope that these talks help us understand the deeper meaning of the teachings and the deeper ideas behind the topics that we will be examining. We have a whole series of topics. We begin with the Sarva Dharma Samabhava, or what is often regarded as all religions are the same or equal or one, and as part of a deeper inquiry into Dharma. Dharma is one of the most profound and also difficult and many-sided terms to understand that comes out of India and the Bharatiya and Sanskrit traditions. It is one of those terms that cannot be translated, even though it has several different levels of meaning. At the same time, in the world today, the type of discourse that we have through the mass media and the information-based technology is a very superficial discourse in which words are reduced to very simplistic, outer, generally social, political meanings, and a great deal of misunderstanding is caused accordingly. Many words of Indian thought have been mistranslated, and then the mistranslation causes various types of distortion. So this is a very important place to begin. First of all, we're going to be studying the term Dharma in the broader sense, which is a term not of human thought, but a way of understanding both the natural law and also the energies, the nature, the movement of consciousness and intelligence behind the universe. So Dharma is not about ordinary human study, but about attuning human life to a nature of reality that is beyond the limitations of the human brain and the human mind. In the Dharmic traditions coming out of India, there has not been a reliance on historical personalities or historical revelations or crediting ideas to historical people in order to explain them and their development. There has been an attribution or recognition of a dharma or a cosmic law, mahatattva, cosmic intelligence, atma, consciousness, self-aware universe, and in attempting to move beyond the limitations and the biases of the human mind to a universal idea of truth that is not rooted in theory, but is rooted in the nature of things. For example, is the nature of fire to burn. If you say fire is wet, then it's a different thing that you are talking about. So we have this Bharatiya, Dharmic, and Sanskritic tradition. It also permeates the other dialects of India. And these terminologies have been examined from people in the West coming from two related traditions. One is the Judeo-Christian and Islamic religious tradition with its own theological terminology. And the second is the Western rational, scientific, philosophical tradition, which also has its own terminology. So what's happened is the mass of ideas from the Dharmic traditions has been recast in these other traditions in a way that demeans or distorts them, sometimes intentionally, but sometimes unintentionally, owing to the different mindset, the different view of the universe behind these two different traditions. It would be like translating poetry into a language by a person who was not a poet, did not appreciate poetry, or thought the poetic text was about science or religion or some other factor. So in other words, these translations have caused us more problems as they have made connections or reveal things. And one of the most common of these translations is Dharma as religion, and the idea that different religions are different dharmas. For the Dharmic traditions, there's this idea of a common dharma behind the different Dharmic traditions. Now, the translation works both ways. Just as Dharma has been translated as religion, the Dharmic traditions have been recast as if they were religions. But in fact, they're not. They are ways of knowledge, they are ways of, they have philosophy, psychology, yoga, meditation, art, music, dance, literature, temple worship, medicine. They cover the whole of life, and they were primarily looked at as a way of integration with the cosmic life and as ways of knowledge. In the Western tradition, the religious traditions were regarded as ways of faith, not ways of knowledge. And it was understood from the beginning that these traditions could, or actually to a great extent were, irrational. One of the early church followers about the belief in the resurrection of Jesus and the salvation from all sin even made the statement that this must be a divine revelation, or it must be from someone who is crazy, not rational, because these ideas go far beyond what we ordinarily perceive or know or consider rationally to be true. So we have this concept of faith-based traditions, and we also then, in dialogue between faith-based traditions, we have the concept of interfaith, faiths coming together. And the Eastern traditions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jain, Sikh, and their different offshoots, have then also been called other faiths that should be respected. Now, this is a very curious idea because in the Dharmic traditions, there is an acceptance of the role of faith, particularly Shraddha. But faith is not the determinative factor. In order to do something, you need to have the faith that you can do it. But having the faith that you can do it is not the same as actually doing it. And faith is also of different types. If we study the Bhagavad Gita, there is a discussion of tamasic, rajasic, and sattvic type faiths, and the practices that go with them. And curiously here, a lot of the behavior that we see coming out of the faith-based traditions in terms of holy war, jihad, crusade, exclusive beliefs would be regarded as a rajasic or perhaps even a tamasic form of faith relative to what the Gita says. This doesn't mean everything in those faiths would be classified as that. There are also sattvic factors as well. But this idea of faith as being a universally acceptable thing is something that we can question, particularly from the Dharmic-based traditions. So when we create or we correlate religion, faith, and Dharma together, we can create very confused or blurred thinking. Let's look at Christianity to begin with. I was born as a Christian. I know what that tradition has to say. It has a creed, which is a declaration of faith. And part of that declaration is that Jesus is the only Son of God. He died, was resurrected after 3 days, went to heaven by the side of God the Father, and through him we can be saved by his sacrifice, by his blood, from our own sins, which otherwise we would not have the capacity to overcome. Whether this is true or whether this is valuable, whether this ennobles people, is not the question. There may be many people such thoughts have ennobled. The fact is, though, it is not a dharma. See? In the Dharmic traditions, dharma refers to a certain law of nature, the nature of Agni, fire, to burn. There are certain ethical and spiritual laws, like the law of karma. We could compare these things relative to science with, say, the law of gravity or other physical laws. So they do not depend upon or relate to these personal factors. So a matter of faith is not a matter of dharma. The matter of faith is a statement of a particular community. It is an assertion of a belief which to some extent may be irrational or may go against the laws of nature. And in the Dharmic traditions, we are never asked to accept anything based upon faith alone. Faith can be a factor in terms of having faith in ourselves, faith in the teachers, faith in the teachings, but we're not asked to accept something based on faith alone, and we're not asked to accept something necessarily irrational by faith. In Dharmic traditions, liberation, knowledge, moksha comes through, I should say liberation or moksha comes through knowledge. It doesn't come through faith. Believing in a person, believing in a miraculous event may help us in some ways. It does not liberate or calm the mind or take us to a point of transcendence. So when we look at the basic comparison between Dharmic traditions and faith-based traditions, we must recognize their differences and also recognize their different goals and different points of view. Even those coming out of faith-based traditions are happier if we describe what Dharmic traditions are. Sometimes they believe that Dharmic traditions are recasting them as faith-based monotheism in order to confuse people about their true nature and make them more like their religions, to make them more modern and more acceptable. And when we look at the Dharmic traditions, we also have to look at what is the goal. Goal relative to Dharma through knowledge, the meditation traditions, moksha, nirvana, is a state of awareness beyond the conceptual mind. You know, in the Yoga Sutras, Chitta Vritti Nirodha, the calming, the silencing of the mind, the deconditioning of the mind. Faith is a kind of conditioning. Belief is a kind of conditioning. You may say it's a good conditioning, whatever you may say, but it is a type of conditioning. It is not the goal of the meditation-based traditions. Meditation-based traditions aim at a direct experience of truth, reality, through the silent mind, beyond all concepts and theories. And even the philosophies and the ideas we have in the Dharmic traditions are aids to practice. The ultimate truth is beyond name and form, word and concept. So in the faith-based tradition, there is a concept of salvation. Salvation is very clearly defined as salvation from sin and going to a heavenly world, and a heavenly world which is generally described in physical terms. A number of years ago, we had a yoga conference in Jerusalem, and one of the main speakers was the head mufti, head Islamic leader of the city of Jericho, which is a very important ancient city relative to the West Bank. And he made this point very clear to us. He said, look, heaven is a physical world where there is no death and suffering, and there are no non-believers. So when we look at these traditions, we have to understand what it is that they are saying. In Dharmic traditions, there's a recognition there are other worlds, other lokas, some heavenly worlds, you can say. But that is not the goal of moksha or the goal of nirvana. So when we look at this idea of all religions being the same or equal, what is it that we actually mean, and what is it is true? We just had a very wonderful conference for 3 days here on harmony of religions and welfare of mankind. And generally, there was an avoidance of speaking about anything relative to theology or philosophy, because obviously at that level, the differences are easier to see. There was the emphasis of a common idea of morality or ethics. Love your neighbor, practice peace, or nonviolence, don't steal, tell the truth. The foundation of what we can call ultimately universal ethics. But I would like to point out here that such a universal ethics is not only the basis of religion, it's the basis of law, justice, in all traditions, at least to some degree. The religious people have used it and emphasized it in some ways, but is not something that belongs to them. But there is in the different religious traditions a very different idea as to where the authority for this type of ethical behavior comes from. In the biblical traditions, God said, do not kill. It is the authority of God that is behind the law. And if one breaks that law, it is the punishment given by God that one is likely to experience. Now, in the Dharmic traditions, similar laws are recognized, but for a very different reason. Concept of ahimsa to begin with. You do not want to be harmed. No living creature wants to be harmed. Therefore, in having respect for the nature of all life, for the nature of the universe, we do not harm anyone. There is no need to bring God into it. It is a factor of common behavior and recognizing the nature of reality. So too on all these other ethical laws. You do not want someone to steal your property. Other people do not want their property to be stolen. So for mutual respect and understanding a commonality of our existence, we have this principle: we do not steal, we do not take. Now, why I am emphasizing this principle is very important, because in the faith-based traditions, God has various commandments that he gives. One of the commandments of the 10 Commandments is, thou shalt not erect any statues or idols in my name. Now, non-killing is a universal principle, but no usage of statues or images in religion is not a universal principle. And even some traditions, like the Catholic tradition that have come out of the biblical tradition, to some extent could be accused, as the Protestants said, of violating that commandment. So besides what we call as the universal ethics, there's also what we can call the theological ethics. You must, when we were children in Catholicism, I was told, I actually took it very seriously, you must go to church on Sunday. If you miss even one Sunday, you will go to hell. So every Sunday came, and I was very concerned to make it to church, or I felt my life was ruined, and there's nothing else that I could do. As I grew up, I found so many of my friends, other Catholics, were not going to church on Sunday and doing the other so-called commandments that were would cause this type of punishment. So we see that religion has a theological ethics as well as the universal ethics. And we've seen this also come out in certain areas. This is one of the problems that jihadists have. There are certain laws in the religion to be peaceful or to not kill. But then when the theology also says you must convert, or the one who is not a part of our faith is less than human or not to be trusted. In other words, when the theological ethics is then used to override the universal ethics, so that you can kill in the name of God. You can do things in the name of God that in terms of universal ethics would not be allowed. So in the Dharmic traditions, there is not a place for theological ethics. There is only a place for universal ethics. For the faith-based traditions, it is our request to them that they remove the theological ethics, or they make it optional for their particular community. If you want to be a practicing Catholic and the Catholics say you have to go to church every Sunday or God is unhappy with you, that is fine for members of that particular belief if they want to follow that. But to make that into a universal principle that people outside your religion who don't go to church must go to hell because that is what the theological ethics says. So essentially, theological ethics was invented by priests and people who were trying to impose a certain authority, and we should not confuse the two. The same authority that says do not kill, or the same law that says do not kill, and it cannot be then taken to the theological ethics of you must go to church on Sunday, you must do all these other things as well. So that must be understood. Now we must also understand what is this phenomenon of religion. And I say this because religion is many things, just as all culture has many different things. So let's take a statement like all religions are the same, and all religions are good, and all religions are different paths to truth, and apply it to other aspects of human behavior. All governments are good. All laws are good. All art is beautiful. All scientific theories are correct. All scientists agree on all things, and there should be no dispute or no argument between them. So in other words, if we apply this logic to the other areas of life, it doesn't make any sense at all. Are we going to tell people all medicine is the same? So it doesn't matter what medicine you take as long as it's an approved medicine. When you go to the store to buy vegetables, we don't say all vegetables are equal, and just pick up whatever you find, take it home, combine it however you like, and you will have a healthy meal. See? So we have to understand that what Dharmic traditions teach is pluralism. Of a pluralism of a certain type. There is one truth. There are many paths to it. But there are also many paths away from it. Not all paths lead to truth. Just as in science. Science is aiming at a certain unitary truth about the universe, but incorrect scientific theories are possible. And scientific theories like the law of gravity, which were found to be true on one level, are later on found to be abrogated and not true at another level. So the Dharmic approach is that there are many true teachings and approaches. There are many ways to truth, but they're not necessarily all equal or the same. And there are also paths that may take you in another direction. What we have here then relative to the belief-based traditions is more of a tendency towards what we call mass belief and mass salvation. You're saved by believing in Jesus alone in some of the Christian traditions. In Dharmic traditions, moksha, nirvana is achieved by sadhana. It requires an individual practice, an individualized practice sustained over a period of time. It is not an en masse belief. Now, in Dharmic traditions, you can have en masse beliefs. You believe the Buddha was the great enlightened one. You believe Krishna is avatar. But that in itself is not the means of moksha. It may help, it may give you some background, but merely accepting Krishna as the avatar doesn't give you moksha. So in other words, in the Western world, we have the phenomenon of what can be better called organized religion and organized belief, where we have very defined beliefs and institutions, and used at a mass level, and at certain times, particularly in the medieval world, supported by and enforced by the apparatus of a state, and even military or legal or police force to enforce that belief. That is being reduced in the modern world, but even in the modern world, freedom of religion is not yet a fact everywhere, or even to all degrees. Let's take my own country, the United States, as one of the countries that's supposed to represent freedom of religion. But in terms of our foreign policy, we favor one particular religions. If Christians are criticized or attacked anywhere in the world, the United States government will be there to protect them, but not for other groups. Or take a country like France, which was the great home of the great French Revolution. Freedom of religion is there, but only freedom of some religions. For example, Hinduism is not a religion that is recognized as legal in France. So if you are married as a Hindu in France, that marriage has no binding validity. Same way is also true in Russia and a number of countries in Europe. Freedom of religion is for certain religions, not for all religions. And we also have, besides the organized religions, we have many native traditions, Native American, Native African, Native Asian. You'd be surprised to know that up to 30 years ago, practicing the native Hawaiian religion was illegal in the United States, and you could be fined up to $10,000 for practicing the native Hawaiian religion because of the influence of the Christian churches in that particular region. And you'll also be surprised to know Swami Vivekananda, as we know, went to the United States in 1893. And you all know that the most liberal state in the United States is what? It's California, right? In 1910, the governor of California issued a proclamation that Hindus should not be allowed because they're heathen and unclean. They should not be allowed to immigrate. And actually, Indians, you see, there's almost no immigration of Indians into the United States until the 1960s. That was also part of these laws. So in other words, even the countries that are talking about freedom of religion, it is still a work in progress or a limited thing. We have countries like Saudi Arabia where you have a state-enforced religion. Other religions are not allowed. You have the idea of Christian democracies or Islamic republics, which, according to secular parlance, is a contradiction in terms. So we have this phenomenon of organized religions with often state control and en masse beliefs. Everybody is said to must follow a certain belief. In Germany, for example, you can take the choice of the Catholic Church or the Protestant Church. And by the way, in Germany, they take a certain percentage of your income. The only way you can get out of that is to go to the church where you were baptized and have your name removed from the baptismal rolls. And some Germans are doing that. So there is a state-enforced religion to some degree, even though most of the people are not terribly religious today. Point is, I'm leading to is in Dharmic traditions should not be understood as organized religion in that sense. They don't have an overriding single church, and they emphasize individualized practice over en masse belief. And that is why, or one of the reasons why they've had much more tolerance. In Europe, you had the Inquisition, you had holy wars, you had the 30-year war in the 17th century between the Protestants and the Catholics that depopulated a third of Central Europe. Even today, the Pope is not allowed to go into Russia. No Pope has ever been to Russia because the Russian Orthodox people do not accept the Catholic Church, and they feel the Pope is going to go there to convert their people. This is maybe a historical sidelight, but many of you have heard of the Crimean War in the 19th century. Britain and France allied with Turkey against Russia because the Russians were going to take back Constantinople and Jerusalem for the Christians. And the French said, we would rather have the Turks there than the Russians because the Russians are an opposing branch of Christianity and they will cause trouble for us. So in other words, Dharmic traditions are emphasizing individual-based experience cannot be equated with organized religion in that sense. A lot of the thinkers of Europe criticize organized religions and say, and belief in God. Neither one of these is required in Dharmic traditions. And then here we have another problem, this term atheist. See? In Europe, atheist is a very well-defined term, and there is this clash between the theist and the atheist. In India, that's not such a defined difference. So to criticize someone as being an atheist, the Dharmic traditions would not necessarily accept that. What's necessary in the Dharmic tradition is that one is involved in an inquiry into what is Dharma. Okay? There's a number of ways that inquiry can take place, but that inquiry does not require a belief in God as a principle. Some traditions may require that or recommend that to some degree. Some Dharmic bhakti traditions in some ways may say that, but is not a universal phenomenon, nor is someone rejected, condemned simply because they're an atheist. In fact, many of the atheists in the Western world are much more open to Dharmic traditions and Dharmic ideas than are the true believers, because they're people who have rejected organized faith-based religion and are looking, and the faith-based God, and they're looking for an alternative. Even in my own intellectual development, in my late teens, I went through an atheistic phase because after growing up as a Catholic and discovering about the popes and the anti-popes and the Inquisition and the genocide of the Native Americans, I lost that particular faith. So in that interim, I looked at the atheistic thought, and then there was a point I used to call myself a mystical atheist. And the reason why is because I began to recognize there was some higher consciousness beyond the universe, but it was also beyond the theistic concept of God in heaven, or Jesus, or Allah, or any of the ways that theology has portrayed a single being. So in other words, Dharmic traditions are not organized religions or organized faiths in that sense of creating a uniform belief. They are organized systems of knowledge. For example, the amount of literature you have philosophically, spiritually, culturally, and Dharmic traditions is much greater than in the faith-based traditions. In fact, this is something very curious. If you look at Christian theology of all the different schools, and even Islamic theology, they're both rooted in the philosophy of the pagan Greeks, Aristotle in particular. St. Thomas Aquinas, his Catholic theology is a rewriting or a Catholic spin on Aristotle. A lot of the mystics followed Plato, Neoplatonists, Plotinus, and some of the Hermetic and Gnostic thinkers. In other words, their philosophical, theological tradition was rooted in the pagan traditions and even had some influence with India, but they never gave up the idea of converting the pagans along the way. They never said, we honor Aristotle, so you should be allowed to continue. In terms of conversion, then that tolerance was not accepted. So the point is, these traditions, these Dharmic traditions, have the literature the teachings in which there is this whole examination on Dharma on all levels, whether it's the personal Dharma, social Dharma, family Dharma, Dharma of kings, Dharma of the sadhus, Dharma as a medical principle, Dharma as a psychological principle, Dharma and science. All these things are covered in various degrees. So the knowledge is there, and there's a vast body of knowledge. But that knowledge is not limited to or controlled by an overriding institution or particular belief. That is why in India you didn't have that war between the church and the thinkers, whether they were scientists or artists and all the rest of it that went on after the Renaissance. Europe went through a dark age when the Greek learning was rejected, and it didn't come back to an age of more enlightenment until the Greek learning was back, and most of that Greek learning was not Christian. And in some instances it also included, for example, in the Italian Renaissance, they also brought in teachings from as far away as India into their practices and traditions. And you'll notice at that time there was a renaissance of pagan images throughout Europe, all 17th century, 18th century. And there was that battle between the church and the thinkers. Finally they came to a point of peace. And the point of peace was very curious. If you go to many churches in Europe and palaces, you will of course find, in the church you'll find the religious images. In the garden you'll find the pagan gods. They let the pagan gods exist as artistic images in the garden, even though they were originally sacred images of a deeper reality. So in other words, Dharmic traditions should not be viewed as organized religions or as any enforced type of belief, but as a way of knowledge or inquiry. Now, there were these traditions also in Europe and the Islamic world to some degree, but they did not have the favor so much, or sometimes they were rejected, or the people were even imprisoned or killed for promoting inquiries into Dharma or inquiries into truth that were beyond the stated, officially endorsed beliefs of the orthodoxy that was ruling the country or ruling the region at that particular point of time. The second point here about religion, besides the outer dimension of religion, there is an inner dimension of spiritual experience. And to some extent in the Western world, it's also called mysticism, or the religious experience. And here, if you study the text of different mystics throughout the world where there was a religious experience, you do find greater commonality. There is some sense of unity consciousness. However, I say this with a qualification that must be clearly understood. There are many altered or higher states of consciousness, many different degrees of unity consciousness. And in all traditions, besides, we've had traditions of practitioners who are doing spiritual practices, but in all traditions, it has not just been people with an interior or spiritual or peaceful motivation. We also have militant mysticism throughout the world, where people do intense prayers and chanting and even asceticism and go off to war. And in fact, during crusades and jihads, there is a lot of this type of very intense spiritual or mystical practices going on, trying to create an altered state where you will be a more effective warrior as well. So we also have the instance of people who we may call saints and who had some mystical experience or unity consciousness supporting Inquisition, jihad, and also related factors. So some of the famous mystics of Spain in the 16th and 17th century of the Counter-Reformation that the Catholics speak about with their prayers were also in favor of the Inquisition. And they also felt that using force to convert the natives in America was good. And even in India, you have so many tantrics who use mantra meditation for mind control, for gaining power, for so many other things, so that we shouldn't regard mysticism or religious experience as all necessarily one and the same or as good. It also is of different types and can take people in different directions. And in yoga text and Buddhist text, there's also a description of various types of samadhi and why certain samadhis cannot be trusted, and why we have to look beyond just having a experience. So this leads us to the third dimension, or the third aspect of religion, which is what we call, from the Dharmic tradition, the Adhyatmic approach. Adhyatmic spirituality. Spirituality is a way of self-knowledge. And here we're not talking about simply the physical bodily self or the mental psychological self, but our true nature beyond body and mind. We have to say this with clarity because in the Greeks they talked about self-knowledge as mainly knowledge of the human person. And in the West today, when they talk about self-knowledge, it's mainly psychology. Psychology is not about who you are, it's about your past. See? If you want to understand who you are, you need to forget your past. That is the Dharmic approach. Analyzing your past will get you caught in your past and make you a victim of your previous conditioning. So a way of self-knowledge. So Dharmic traditions take us to a way of self-knowledge. Ramana Maharshi said that the purpose of organized religion is to take us to a point of self-inquiry. Once we have that, you can let the organized religion go. It's served its purpose, and move into your inner practice. Once a Western yoga student teacher came to see Ramana and asked him, "How can I know God?" And Ramana said, "Leave God out of it. God is a distant thought, distant person. Know yourself. If you know yourself, then you know God. So look into that self-inquiry. Do not worry about this faith or belief in God." Even Mahatma Gandhi said, "Truth is God." Even Anandamoy Ma said that if it's a question of taking truth or taking God, you take truth and you let God go. So that inner dimension of self-knowing. In that inner dimension of self-knowing, there is unity, whoever does that. We find that in Dharmic traditions. We do find that among, say, Meister Eckhart. We do find that among some mystics. We find that among some scientists and artists, at least to some degree. So there is a unity of religion or a unity of truth or inner truth at a certain level that we can honor. What we need, when we talk about pluralism in the Dharmic tradition, we recognize that you have many choices. You know, in modern society, we also have pluralism. You're free to vote for who you want. You're not totally free because there's propaganda, there's money, there's bribery. But in any case, theoretically, you're supposedly free to vote for whoever you want. But you're never told that it doesn't matter who you vote for, they're all the same. Or if you do say that, you're coming from a different place than Sarva Dharma Samabhava. So in other words, we have choices. There are different influences, and we must understand our individual nature. In Dharmic traditions, at least from the Vedic or Vedantic view, we teach that you have three things: doshas, gunas, and karmas. Doshas, vata, pitta, kapha, biological, health-based factors. Gunas, sattva, rajas, tamas are factors, levels of the mind, awareness. Karmas, samskaras are your own individual factors. You need to have a spiritual path that allows you, that is in harmony with your temperament and allows you to resolve the doshas, the gunas, the karmas, not simply have to transcend body and mind. See, in belief-based traditions, you are identified physically as belonging to a particular belief. I am a Muslim, a Hindu, a Christian, whatever. That is a physical identity. Physical identity rests upon the idea of physical reality. If there is some God or truth, there is an infinite or eternal reality, in which obviously physical identity is not an important thing or doesn't have any validity at all. So in Dharmic traditions, we're meant to transcend name, form, identity, body, and mind. Even the Western intellectual tradition has never really looked as to what is the consciousness beyond the mind. They glorify the intellectual as the highest human type, whether it's Einstein or Goethe or Voltaire or whoever it is. The rishi, the yogi, is a different dimension altogether. It is someone who has gone beyond the mind, who is not in that realm of simply making discoveries in the realm of time and space, but has a reality and awareness of that which transcends time and space. Now, what we have in the religious traditions, there's a recognition that a certain person or teacher has had a relationship with God or truth. In the more exclusive traditions, they hold it is only that person who has that. It is only our prophet who has had that, only our Savior. So you must go through him. You cannot have that yourself. Whereas in the Dharmic tradition, the opposite is taught. You must have that realization yourself in order to transcend. The guru is a teacher, is not the goal. See? There is no one else who is going to save you. In Dharmic tradition, there's no salvation by proxy. Your own sadhana is necessary to bring about that greater transcendence, transformation. Just because you know somebody who did it, just because you belong to a certain family and some person in that family. There's a lot of nepotism in India, so we know how this is working out on other levels. There's even spiritual nepotism where children are being made heads of mutts and ashram for no other qualification than blood. Spirituality, realization is like a lightning flash. It seldom occurs in the same place in consecutive order. But the point is that salvation by proxy is not there in the Dharmic traditions. And the positive side of that, if that salvation by proxy is not there, you can't condemn anybody else for not having a certain identity or following a certain belief or repeating a certain creed. Whatever creed you follow is ultimately a formula that has to be transcended to a direct perception of truth or reality. So most of what we call both religion and philosophy in the Western world is still caught in the illusions of the mind. Is still caught in the realm that the Vedanta will call the Maya. There is not a living sadhana for transcending the mind, or if it is there, it is very limited, or it has been influenced by the teachings or the teachings coming out of the Dharmic traditions. So the true unity is the unity of the experience of self-realization, which is the core or the deepest essence of the religious experience. So that is why in the Dharmic pluralism, I call that more the pursuit of the pursuit of spiritual experience at an individual level. See? And at that level, we should honor and accept all possible resources that are there, but we need to know what is appropriate for ourselves. It's the same thing in Ayurvedic medicine. The medicine that's good for one person may not be good for another. The diet that is good for one person may not be good for another. There cannot be one medicine for all, one church for all, one guru for all. Spirituality is not about uniformity, it is about universality, which is the ability to understand and embrace the unique and the individual in a broader vision, not reducing them to a particular pattern or formula. Now, once we do this, we also say we need to respect and honor all the cultural traditions of humanity. That doesn't mean we can't critique them or we have to follow them blindly. But we should honor everything all human beings has done as part of a common family. And we should honor all levels of spiritual experiences. The Native Americans have wonderful spiritual experiences. They talk about the sacred nature of the earth. They talk about the universality of the sky, the Father, the Creator. When we think that only the people who followed the world's major religions had any type of ethics or morality. We find, to some extent, it was just the opposite. The Native Americans never told a lie. The white Christians who took over their property and converted them violated every single treaty that they made with them. And in the end, they took the children away from their families, made them renounce their own languages, their own customs, and be remade in their Western civilized image. The same thing was attempted in India, but you had one advantage: there were too many of you. It was not so possible to do. And you also had a very thriving intellectual tradition. You can study the statements made by Hindu thinkers throughout history, even all the way up to their dialogue with Christian fathers, Portuguese missionaries, where they point out quite clearly that the missionaries are following biased, limited, and incomplete traditions and truth. But why were they not able to stop that? Because what was being enforced was not a dialogue, was not a debate or discussion between equals, or a willingness to learn, but it was an imposition of conversion through political, material, and other means. That's not to say there wasn't some genuine dialogue that occurred at certain places or in certain times, but it was not the dominant factor. So when we say that all religions are the same, organized religion is definitely different. Religious experience has more commonalities, but some differences. The unitary Atma Vidya has greater unity, but it has less respect among certain orthodox traditions. So when we honor pluralism, we are not saying that it's all the same. We are saying that you have choices, just as you have choices as to food, as to relationship, as to work. And so Dharma always rests upon viveka. To understand Dharma, Dharma Mimamsa inquiry into Dharma, you are cultivating some sense of discernment to go along with that. You can take a child to a museum and show them a great work of art. They have the same visual perception that you do, but they come to a very different conclusion as to the value of that work of art, or they don't see it has any particular value at all. Why? Because the artist had another level of discernment, a deeper level of perception. In Yoga Sutras, it said that the moksha, or the kaivalya, is brought about by the viveka khyati, a discerning perception. Both the enlightened and the unenlightened see the same body. One regards them as, that is me. The other sees it as an instrument of a deeper consciousness. So when we confuse, say all religions are the same, then we make these statements that all beliefs are the same, all philosophies are the same, all practices are the same, and viveka is diminished. Well, actually, you destroy viveka, you destroy everything. Now, this doesn't mean we become intolerant. In fact, what we need to do, particularly Hindus, but all the Dharmic traditions, is find out what the other people say about themselves. Okay? Let Christians define Christianity. Let Muslims define Islam. Accept what they are saying about their religion. But to say then that, oh, Muhammad was a yogi, Jesus was a yogi. Maybe they were, but that is not the belief of the people in these traditions. Or to say that our practices, some similar practices may be there, but in their theology, their philosophy, they are not pursuing the yoga, the meditation, the moksha. And even some of the mystics may be doing something similar, but there are also some differences there. Let us accept things as they are and have the viveka to see what they are. If you want to know what is the correct medicine for yourself, you can say all medicine is the same, all doctors are the same. You have to find out, someone gives you a good diagnosis, proper individualized medicine, the right lifestyle and diet to support, and monitoring of your condition over a certain period of time. That is why in the Dharmic traditions, the guru has been more important than the ancient text. The living teacher has been more important than the ancient texts. Ancient texts are part of a body of knowledge, but that body of knowledge has to be adapted at an individual level. And for that, you need a real teacher. What is the difference? We talk about teachers. A true teacher teaches the individual what is appropriate for them. We have teachers today who en masse teach the same thing to everyone. In America, yoga teachers teach the same sequence of asanas to everybody, maybe slower or faster. The true teacher, true yoga teacher, would adopt a practice of yoga to that particular person and their needs. So en masse belief comes in when you do not have proper teachers that can give individualized instruction. So we must go beyond the era of accepting mass belief as enough. Mass belief can have its place. You can belong to a particular community, but that should only be a preliminary phenomenon to going into a deeper self-examination. And then I would also like to note that we give too much credit to this idea that people actually belong to different religions. No one is born in any religion. When a child takes birth, there's not a stamp on their body that says somewhere, bona fide, certified, Christian, Hindu, Islamic birth, or whatever it is. Just like they brand the cattle, then you cannot use it because it belongs to this community. We are all born as human beings, and we have an underlying unity as human beings. The problem is, religion can divide human beings into warring communities. The point we need to understand is if religion divides human beings into warring communities, then that religion should be rejected, or at least that view, that particular idea in the religion should be rejected. Foundation for Dharma should be recognizing the unity of human beings and also the unity of all life. No one, no soul, no creature will ever be left behind in the end. We have our different karmas, we have our different movements. So if our religion has one God but two humanities, see, then that religion is not a religion of unity, and that God is also not one. And then it also takes us back to this point that we must move beyond name, form, and identity. That is how we find unity of religion. Not saying that all identities are good. See, identity is an outer thing, okay? I'm born in America. I have to say my national identity is an American. If people try to understand what I do as what Americans do, they will be a bit surprised. And that is why we always tell people, whoever you are in communication with, approach them as an individual, forget about their background, speak to them as another human being. Don't say, I accept your religion also, or whatever it is, I accept your country, whatever it may be, I accept your politics. Try to understand who they are at an individual level, and Dharmic spirituality encourages us to do that. Let us not label people. Even if someone says they belong to a particular religion, then who belongs? Is it the body? Is it the mind? Is it their culture? Is it their family? Certainly we have certain social, political identities, but these are outer phenomenon. Spirituality is a factor that is coming to us from within. So when we say all religions are equal, all dharmas are equal, what are we actually saying? That's a political slogan that's used in certain political contexts. But what we really mean is that we should honor the same pluralism in religion and spirituality that we're trying to honor in science and other places of life. You should be free to follow whatever religion, spirituality you want, or even none. And you should not be criticized or condemned or attacked at a social, community, or state level for that procedure. At the same time, we need more dialogue between members of different religions and spiritual communities, not simply a dialogue of saying, I accept you and you accept me, but a dialogue of, can we have a new inquiry into what is truth? Can we have a new inquiry as to what is the appropriate truth for all human beings? And can we take spirituality out of simply faith and belief and turn it into a shared universal way of knowledge, and see how all these pieces come together and how all our differences can be integrated without the loss of their different beauties or different nuances or different angles of appearance or expression, but can be brought into a greater sense of oneness with this universal consciousness, with this understanding of the infinite or eternal, whether you call that God, whether you call that something else. It is that inner unity consciousness that matters, and its recognition, not simply honoring different institutions and identities. We can respect these, we can see where they are, but we must recognize a deeper humanity beyond these outer differences. So with those words, I will complete this particular topic that we are doing. But in conclusion, it is not a simplistic matter. We need a new inquiry into Dharma. We need respect and tolerance without giving up discrimination and understanding. And we cannot just accept the world as it is. Unity of religion has yet to be achieved. And unity of humanity is yet to be achieved. And that only occurs when we go to a deeper level of inner practice. It cannot just simply be done at an outer level, although many outer practices, outer tolerance can be a very helpful step to begin with. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.